Okay. So anyways, inside of a compressor here has a motor identical to a dryer motor. Dryers have run and start windings. That compressor has a run and start winding. Okay. The only difference is that this one has a fan, but on that compressor it has a piston like a car engine, and it's a pump. It's pumping the refrigerant around the system. All right, so we pumped into the capillary tube, and it's controlling how fast we go into the evaporator. But that compressor has oil in it. If we have a problem where there's fans are not working, the condenser's really dirty, is that gonna allow it to cool and release the heat that it's supposed to release? Okay, that's very important to understand, because refrigerants inside a refrigeration system, they work on temperature and pressure. I'm going to show you in a minute the temperature pressure chart and explain to you that every different refrigerant has a different temperature pressure relation. Okay? So if I don't release the heat, let's say the customer's house is filled with dog or cat hair, and there's a fan running, but it can't cool it down, what do you think is going to happen to my pressure in here? Is it going to go up or go down? If I add heat, is it going to increase my pressure or decrease?
Increase.
It's going to increase the pressure if I increase the temperature. The two of them go together. If I lower the pressure, I lower the temperature. If I raise the pressure, I raise the temperature. Okay? And that will cause excess oil to flow through the system and create a restriction on my capillary tube. Some of the oil from here, or moisture. That's what the filter's job is to do. Now, when we're here, that's 100% liquid refrigerant. We're still at 100% here, liquid, and we're entering the capillary tube we're entering the evaporator from the capillary tube as a liquid. But what's happening inside of the evaporator? It's doing what?
Releasing heat. Turns to vapor.
It's not releasing heat.
It's getting turned to vapor.
It's turning to vapor. That's what that job is. That is, if I told you that is the evaporator, then you would think that is what makes the vapor. That's the name of the part. So it's turning liquid, like water, into gas, like steam. So as it comes in, you have a little fan in here blowing air through the coils, and inside your refrigerator, and this is hard for you to think, your freezer's what temperature?
33?
What temperature is your freezer?
0.
0 degrees. But that fan is blowing that air over there at 0 degrees, adding heat to your refrigerant. And so I say, what, 0 degrees? It's hot? Don't think of heat and cooling based on our body temperature. If I told you it was 0 degrees outside, you would say it's freezing outside. But what if I told you it was 100 degrees below 0? You couldn't walk outside with turning into a snowman immediately. Okay? So temperature, don't think of temperature as relations to, is it hot or cold to you? Okay? Heat is always present in everything. I said there's no such thing as cold. So as we come in here, the Freon comes as a liquid, and immediately it starts turning to vapor. So again, right in the middle, it's saturated, which means what? It's a mixture between liquid and vapor. So it's coming in liquid, and it starts getting vapor, and it starts turning to vapor. So by the time it leaves, it's 100% vapor again. So Freon is constantly turning from a liquid to a vapor and a vapor to liquid. Now look at this system. Forget all the words that I wrote on there. How many moving parts do we have in this system? One. One moving part. Everything else here is just tubes. It's just pipes. They don't move. They don't do anything. Freon's flowing through them just like a water pipe. Okay? But the pipe itself isn't doing anything as far as moving or like a compressor has moving parts. It's the only moving part. Everything else is just tubing. So real quick, before I go into the pressure chart and everything, give me some examples of problems we could have in this system. A restriction was one of them. We could have either a partial restriction where the freon flowing through here can be partially blocked. It'd be like a 4-lane highway and 3 of them, there's an accident and everybody had to go down to one highway lane. Well, you've created a partial restriction, but what if you had an 18-wheeler roll over and kill 10 people on the freeway? They'd shut the freeway down, right? That would be 100% or complete restriction, right? I know, bad analogy, but it does ring in your head, right? Okay, so what other things could go wrong with the refrigerant system, with the system itself?
You're gonna have a leak from the condenser.
What?
Dirty cords.
Dirty quart? No, I'm talking about within the system.
The reverse, a leak.
We could have a leak. What else could be wrong?
Overheating.
Overheating? No. But the only 2 other things that would happen is usually either if someone serviced the unit and didn't do it correctly, they might have overcharged the system, put too much freon in there, or they could have undercharged the system. But these are the only problems you're going to run across within a refrigerant system. You're going to either have a leak, and all the gas leaked out, or you're going to have where someone serviced it and put too much gas in there, or someone serviced it and didn't put enough gas in there. What if they put the wrong gas in there?
Oof. Oof.
It's not going to work right either, right? Okay, so let's go.
Is there any way to tell if someone put the wrong gas in them?
Yes, and I'll answer that question with this chart right here. Every refrigerant, these are all refrigerants here. The 2 we deal with is 134A and R600. Those are the 2 main ones. And if you are as old as me and been around as long as me, you would have R12 too. I forgot who I was talking to today, and I was talking about 134A system, and one of my techs. And I said, well, you know, that Sub-Zero he's working on is an R12 system. He says, what's that?
Isn't that illegal?
It's not illegal. You can still use it, but you have to be certified and licensed to do it. They don't make R12 anymore. And I basically told him, you can put the other gas in there, but it might not last. But he didn't know what R12 was. But R12, for those of you who didn't know, was what we had in our cars and all our refrigerators before they went to 134A. Now they're saying, oh, this is causing a problem with global warming, climate change. We got to prevent this from damaging our atmosphere. So we're going to go to R600 because it doesn't do that. That's why we're changing gases, because of climate change. All right? So let's talk for a second before I go any further on this chart. What's the temperature inside my freezer? 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to use a different color. 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, in order to reach 0 degrees, the tubing has to be colder than the temperature we're trying to reach. If I want 0 degrees in my freezer, the temperature has to be colder than 0 degrees. Does anybody know how much colder it has to be?
15 degrees colder.
15 to 20 degrees. 15 to 20 degrees colder. So if that's 0, what is 15 degrees colder?
Negative 15.
Minus 15. So let's go back to that chart for a second. Over here on the left-hand side, we have temperature. 40 degrees, 15 degrees, 5 degrees, whatever it is. 15 is there. You guys can see 15. It's also on the right-hand side here. So if you're on this side of the table, you can read that way. If you're on that side, you can read this way. But at 15 degrees, all the way here, what is this telling me here? What is this chart telling me?
How much gas to put in?
Not how much gas to put in.
What temperature needs to be?
The heat.
That is pressure. So if I'm doing a 134A refrigerator, which most of our refrigerators right now are 134A, now they're just switching over to 600, so it came out about a year ago. It's just about 0 PSI. So when we're looking at this system here, we have low pressure and high pressure. The evaporator, which was in the picture, and the condenser here. The evaporator is 15 degrees colder, so it can absorb the heat. Because if it's at 0 degrees, it's not going to absorb any more heat. That's the temperature of the air already. We have to be at least 15 degrees colder. All right? And that would be our 134A. Well, what if you ran across an R600 refrigerator? What do you think the pressure of the evaporator would be for R600?
Negative 13.7, or 13.7 in the vacuum.
But why are we getting that number? Why did you get 13.7?
15%, minus 15?
Yes, because we're still going to reach the same temperature with that gas. So the evaporator, the low side of that system is going to be 13 inches in a vacuum. Do you guys know what it means when I say the system's in a vacuum? What does that mean?
Lack of pressure.
That means the pressure inside these pipes, and I'll just take the camera here. That if this is in a vacuum, the evaporator is in a vacuum, that means the pressure inside here is lower than the pressure outside. So if there was a hole in the pipe, instead of gas coming out, air would suck in. Okay? So let's go back to this chart because a lot of people don't understand the benefits of this chart and how to use this chart. Let me just check the camera, make sure that it's lined up. So what if I wanted to use 1, 2, 3, 4 YF? They have those in cars, you know. What pressure would I run that if I wanted to put that in a refrigerator?
2.3.
At almost 2 to 3 pounds of pressure above 0, where that would leak out instead of suck in, right? What if I wanted to use 123? Well, heck, I have to go all the way down here. No, wait, minus 15. I'm 26 inches in a vacuum, a deeper vacuum. So when I'm putting gauges on there and I want to check to see if this system is working properly, I need to know what is a good pressure. Because when people start learning refrigerators and refrigeration system, they're like, okay, I know it's not cooling. I can see the refrigerator's not getting cold. I'm going to put my gauges on it. But the first question they ask is they say, how do I know what pressure it's supposed to be? Like, if I don't know what pressure it's supposed to be, how do I know if it's right or wrong? Right? I mean, how do you know that? You have to know what the pressure is based on this chart. Now, 15 degrees below 0 is 0 psi, or 14 inches in a vacuum if you're doing an R600 refrigerator. What do you think the high side pressure is, the condenser side? Anybody know what the pressure is on a 134A system on the high side?
115 maybe.
Now, 134A is the first white column here, right? Okay, just so you see that. So it's about 125, 120 PSI. Could be a little bit higher depending on the type of condenser. We have many types of condensers. We have one condenser has a fan, like this one here. Has a fan on the other side of it to cool it down. We have one behind like that Skills USA sign. It's a static condenser. It's just tube. And just the air, natural airflow, as it gets hot, hot air is going to rise and cool air is going to rise up. Natural convection, they call it. But it's going to run hotter than a fan because, you know, if you're sitting in this room right now, the fan's not running, it's starting to get a little warm, right? So I turn the fan on, it would be more comfortable. So the same thing with that condenser. If I have a fan running it, I cool it down more. I can lower its temperature down. But that's about 124 PSI. But what if I'm running R600? I need to know, I'm working an R600 unit. I know the low side is 14 inches of vacuum. What's my high side pressure? Well, think about this for a second. If I'm 124 PSI, what's about the temperature of my coil? Between 100 and 104 degrees. Well, it has to be at least 10 or 15 degrees hotter than the outside air so it can release the heat. If it's the same temperature as the room, it's not going to give up any heat. So a refrigeration system, go back to this picture we have here. Refrigeration system is this piece here is going to absorb heat like a sponge. The compressor is going to pump it over here, and we're gonna squeeze the heat out of the sponge so I can go back over here and absorb more heat. And the Freon's constantly flowing around, absorbing heat, releasing heat. That's the whole system. So I'm running at 15 to 20 degrees below zero. My condenser was what temperature? About 100 to 104 degrees above zero. And that way it's about 15 degrees hotter than the air outside it to release the heat. What if I lived in Nevada and it was 110 degrees outside?
It would have to be 125.
It's gonna really ruin the efficiency of my refrigerator. It better be in an air-conditioned house. Because if I put it in the backyard and the sun's hitting that thing at 120 degrees, they ain't gonna do a good job. And then they got some of these condensers, they're inside the wall. Have you ever seen like a chest freezer? Like you lift up the top and you reach down in and get the ice cream or food out? The condenser's in the wall, behind that white panel in the wall. Let me show you. By the way, guys, on this website, this is the self-study. I want everybody in refrigeration to go through this and answer the downloadable questions and take the chapter test, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But let's take a look at this. Here's an evaporator like that one there in the display. This is a GE evaporator, basically the same thing, but they got more fins here, so it releases and absorbs more temperature because the fins give it that extra metal to absorb heat. And then you got one here that every shelf is tubing and Freon's flowing through every shelf. There's no fan in this unit circulating the air. And then if you got right here, there's your chest freezer. Inside this wall, if you walk right up to that unit and touch the wall, you might find it's warm. Now, on most of them, they put it on the sides and the back so customers don't feel it. But the condenser is inside, right up against the wall. Is that very efficient? Does that make it easy for it to release heat? Yes or no?
Inside though? No.
No, it's not very efficient. Because we want it outside the metal so it can give up the heat. Okay, but that's how a warm wall condenser is. The condenser is inside the wall.
So is the exhaust for those, like for the heat at the bottom?
There is no, it just,
No.
if you touch the walls, they're warm and they'll dissipate the heat that way. So the condenser heats up the wall and then the wall lets the heat out. The evaporator's inside the wall too. You see all this frost here? The part that cools is also inside the wall. So let's go back to this temperature pressure chart. So if we look at this chart here, we said that about 100 degrees, we're going to have 124 high side pressure. But what about R600? What's the pressure of R600?
57.9.
57.9. This was R134, this is R600. Because what are we trying to do? Get the same temperature. So you'll see or hear someone say, oh, 134A, its pressures is 0 and 125 or 120. R600 is 14 inches in a vacuum and 50 to 60 on the high pressure. So even though it's a different gas, the temperature we're trying to achieve is the same. If I don't care if I change it to a gas R5,000,003 and asked you what was the pressure on the low and the high side, you're going to say, well, at 100 degrees it's this, and at 15 below zero it's that. Those are the pressures this system should be running at. In other words, that's how I know what the pressures are. A commercial technician that works on commercial refrigeration has all different types of exotic gases, ones we don't use every day where they see all the time. Well, what if they walk up to a unit and they've never seen it before? If they know it's like a regular refrigerator and the temperature and the pressure should be the same as like your household one, they just look at this chart and say, okay, at 100 degrees, the high side pressure should be somewhere around here, depending on what gas I'm using. The temperature pressure chart tells you just now have to know how to use it. You understand that? Okay. So let's go back to our system for a minute.
Does every refrigerator have a chart in it to tell you what pressure it's supposed to be?
No.
That fact? No.
No refrigerator tells you what the running pressures are supposed to be. They only tell you what type of gas is in my refrigerator and how much is in there. And when I say how much, not by pressure, by volume. Like when you're making cookies and says use a half a cup of sugar or use a cup of flour. The half cup or a cup is a measurement, right? Okay, a cup is 8 ounces, right? Well, in a refrigerator, it tells you, and I have that in my presentation here, 1 second. Give me 1 second to find that picture. Under refrigerants. Give me a second, guys, I gotta find that picture. And of course, I'm not going to find it.
It's gonna be the last page, I think.
I'll tell you what, just give me a second, I'll look it up online here. Let me find an image here. Let's find a good one that we can read. Maybe we can read this one. So if we look, this is LG's refrigerator model and serial number and serial number. It's going to tell us refrigerant type is 134A, and inside that refrigerator, how much Freon are you going to put in it?
6.17.
6.17 ounces. So when we work on a system, what type of gas? 134A. We use a little mini scale like this, a food grade scale for R600. We put it on the scale and we measure it. And then as the Freon leaves, we measure 6.17 Freon from here, enters the refrigerator. That's how we charge it. Now for 134A, we use a big 30-pound tank. We use a bigger scale to hold that bigger weight. That's all.
Oh, so you actually put the gas on the scale
When we charge it, and then not only this, like if anybody got a water bottle here, let me borrow that water bottle just for a second. So your Freon tank, when you get it, is about 80% full of Freon. And it's in liquid form from here to here. But the Freon also goes to the top of this in vapor. In this case, water's here. This is all vapor here. Okay? In your tank, inside of this, if you shake it, you can feel at the bottom there's some liquid just like this one, but the whole tank isn't full because we've used it and the gas has been coming out. Okay? But when I want to put it in there, the liquid's down here. So what I do is I have a tool that allows me to turn it upside down so the liquid is here where it comes out. And that goes into my refrigerator as liquid so I can measure the liquid refrigerant going into the system using my scale. Now we're going to demonstrate all this in another day's class. We're just going over the basics here. I put that much gas in there and shut off the gauges, let it run. 134A, I'm looking for 0 on the low side pressure, 125 or 120 on the high side. And that's my refrigerator working. We have to know the pressures in order to know if it's functioning properly. Now, one thing about refrigeration is when we start working on it, last thing we want to do is put gauges and measure the pressures in the system. We want to eliminate everything else. Like, is the door gasket of the refrigerator sealing? If it's not sealing, is it gonna cool well? No. If a fan motor is bad, is it going to cool well? So when we troubleshoot a refrigeration system, before we start dealing with the gas inside, we have to look at other things that could cause problems with the Freon other than Freon. Fan motor, dirty condenser, whatever thing you can eliminate. So when you walk up to the refrigerator, you visually inspect all these things. It only takes 3 to 5 minutes to check them all. Fan motor inside the freezer, fan motor behind the unit. You know, are they running? Is the compressor running? If everything's running and everything looks normal, now I'm gonna go in and check the pressures. Because a refrigerator does not come with a way for you to connect your hoses from your gauges to measure that pressure. The refrigerator have to add a valve so you can check the pressures. So that's why we don't want to check the pressure when it's some other problem. Because once you tap into the system, you could cause more problems than fixing if you're not comfortable doing it and understand what you're doing. So we want to check that. And then if everything checks good, fans, the gasket, and on this presentation that I have here, you can go through all the symptoms and problems to check first, and then all the symptoms and problems to check when you have that problem in there. Okay? So what if you walked up to an AC in the customer's home, an air conditioner? What type of gas do we have in an air conditioner?
134, I think.
No. They don't even have it here. I was looking for R22 or 410. But we have R12 here. Isn't that supposed to be the same as these two here? So if I looked at R12 at 15 degrees below zero, my pressure on the low side is only 2 or 3. It's almost zero, right? That's 134A was 0. So you see the pressures are about the same. That's why they went from 12 to 134A, because at that same temperature, they're about the same pressure. Because if I went to, let's just say, these are all vacuums, but I went to another gas, it may be 40 PSI at 15 degrees below zero, depending on the type of gas. And that would be too high a pressure for my compressor to pump around the system. So we have to have the right ones. Now, every model and serial number of the refrigerator is going to tell you the type of gas and how much gas we're going to put in the refrigerator. Any questions on this? Now, I'm going to break this down into smaller lectures. I'm not going to do an hour long like I normally do. I'm going to break it down into smaller lectures, but I'm going to give you guys some handouts to go with it so that you got something that you can look at while we're doing that. So I'm going to stop it right here.